She stormed out screaming after being told, "You can't bully my staff." What started as a high-profile podcast guest appearance quickly spiraled into a behind-the-scenes clash that no one saw coming. Meghan Markle, reportedly furious after being denied final editing rights on Emma Grede's hit show Aspire, allegedly lashed out when her demands were rejected. Tensions exploded when Grede's production team stood their ground, leading to a shocking confrontation overheard by staff, one that ended with Grede telling Meghan to back off. But what was Meghan so desperate to cut from the episode? Why did Emma refuse to budge? And what's the fallout now that whispers of this explosive moment are spreading across Hollywood? Stay tuned. The truth behind this podcast war is more dramatic than the interview itself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was supposed to be just another high-profile podcast appearance, a controlled, elegant interview to polish Meghan Markle's public image and align her once again with influential female voices in entrepreneurship and media. Instead, it erupted into a firestorm behind the scenes, a confrontation so heated that production staff reportedly froze in their tracks. And it all began with one demand that spiraled into something far more revealing than anything recorded on the microphone. Meghan Markle allegedly insisted on final editorial control of her episode on Emma Grede's podcast Aspire. When denied, everything unraveled. To the average listener, Meghan's voice on the published episode sounded composed, strategic, and eloquent, just as many expected. But what happened after the podcast ended, once the cameras were off and the microphone stopped recording, has become the real story. Multiple sources close to the production now confirm a fierce altercation between Meghan and host Emma Grede in the moments following the taping. The words, "You can't bully my staff," were overheard through thin walls as Emma reportedly stood up to Meghan's increasingly combative tone. And now, the question on everyone's lips isn't just about celebrity behavior. It's about power, manipulation, and the clash between image and truth. But how did it come to this? To understand the intensity of this confrontation, we must rewind the clock several weeks to when Meghan's team first made contact with Aspire's production office. According to insiders, the Duchess of Sussex's PR representatives had been strategically pursuing high-integrity platforms to reframe Meghan's public persona. After the turbulence of her Spotify deal collapsing and continued questions about the authenticity of her family narrative, Meghan needed a setting where she could once again sound grounded, empathetic, and relatable. Emma Grede's Aspire podcast, known for its authenticity, strong women-centered ethos, and massive reach in the business and empowerment space, seemed like the perfect fit. Emma Grede, co-founder of several fashion empires and a media mogul in her own right, had built Aspire into a trusted space for real talk. Guests ranging from Fortune 500 CEOs to social activists had praised her for asking challenging but respectful questions. The conversations were known for being intimate, unfiltered, and free of the plastic polish that dominates much of celebrity media. In short, Aspire was not just another friendly press stop, it was a stage for truth, even when that truth was a little uncomfortable. But from the beginning, Meghan's team was different. Production insiders describe early communications as unusually aggressive. There were a lot of stipulations, one crew member revealed. Everything had to be pre-approved. Topic areas were listed as off-limits. There were repeated reminders about sensitive areas of her life. It didn't feel like an open conversation, it felt like a negotiation. Emma Grede, known for her integrity, reportedly pushed back, politely at first. She believed in protecting her show's reputation for unscripted honesty. She had faced this kind of pressure before, but rarely to this degree. The team agreed to some compromises to move forward basic courtesy guidelines, mutual respect on sensitive subjects. But Emma refused to hand over editorial control. Aspire, she made clear, would remain an independent platform. As the recording day approached, tensions escalated. Meghan arrived at the studio with a large entourage, more than the show typically allows in the taping room. Staff were asked to limit their movement during the interview. Lighting was adjusted per her team's direction. The energy was controlled, but tense. The taping itself, according to several accounts, was professional on the surface. Meghan spoke passionately about female leadership, motherhood, media misrepresentation, and her charity initiatives. Emma guided the conversation with her usual poise, occasionally digging deeper into Meghan's experiences with backlash and public scrutiny. At one point, Emma is said to have asked about Meghan's relationship with truth and storytelling, how she balances public image with personal reality. Those in the room say Meghan answered confidently, but with visible stiffness. Then, the interview ended. And that's when everything began. What happened next has since been reconstructed from first-hand testimonies and internal leaks. Once Emma's team began post-recording protocol, transferring files, archiving audio, and discussing edits. Meghan's representative reportedly pulled aside the senior producer with an urgent request. Meghan wanted the right to review and approve the final edit. Not just a courtesy review. Not just a check for factual corrections. Full editorial sign-off. The request sent a ripple through the room. In the podcast world, editorial integrity is sacred. Hosts retain full rights over content unless formal contracts say otherwise, which, in this case, they didn't. Emma's team had made it clear from the outset. Editorial independence was non-negotiable. When the response came back, no, Meghan would not be given control, everything changed. Meghan, sources claim, became visibly agitated. She raised her voice. She questioned why her concerns were being dismissed. She pointed out moments in the episode she felt came off too harsh or could be misunderstood by the public. Staff described her demeanor as demanding, combative, and entitled. She reportedly insisted that it was her name and her image being broadcast, and therefore she should have the final say. At that moment, Emma Grede entered the discussion. Up to this point, Emma had been in a separate room, finishing a call. When informed of the escalating argument, she stepped in directly, calm, collected, but resolute. Eyewitnesses say the room fell silent as Emma confronted the situation. "No one bullies my staff," she said clearly, interrupting Meghan's tirade. "We respect every guest on this show. We will do the same for you. But we don't give editorial control to anyone, not even royalty." The room froze. According to a junior producer who was present, Meghan was stunned into silence for a few seconds. Then she laughed, an awkward, brittle chuckle, and said something along the lines of, "I didn't mean to make it sound like that. I just don't want to be misunderstood." Emma reportedly replied, "Then let the truth speak for itself." What followed was a tense, quiet exit. Meghan's team gathered her belongings. Her publicist whispered something to the lead producer. And just like that, the Duchess of Sussex left the studio without another word. No follow-up email. No thank you message. No clearance request for media use. The podcast team resumed post-production immediately, and Emma refused to alter any part of the recorded discussion. Within days, whispers of the incident began to leak, first through podcasting circles, then on social media. Staffers posted vague updates hinting at tension with a high-profile guest. Industry blogs picked up on the clues. And eventually, someone, likely from inside the studio, leaked the exact line Emma Grede used. "You can't bully my staff." The story exploded. And in that explosion lies the core of today's episode. What does it mean when public figures who demand authenticity are confronted by their own lack of transparency? What does it say about Meghan Markle's ongoing struggles with the media and with women who refuse to bow to celebrity hierarchy? Why does a podcast confrontation carry this much weight? And how did Emma Grede, a businesswoman who built her platform on empowerment, become the unexpected hero in a clash of egos? Over the next hour, we'll explore every angle of this controversy. From what really happened inside the studio, to the staff testimonies, to the wider implications for Meghan's public image and Emma's rising influence in media. This isn't just a story about a podcast episode gone wrong. It's about control, image, leadership, and the messy reality of two powerful women standing their ground. To fully understand the seismic fallout from Meghan Markle's heated confrontation with Emma Grede, one must first understand the atmosphere surrounding her appearance on Aspire, the critically acclaimed podcast hosted by Emma herself. This was no ordinary interview. It wasn't just a passing media stop meant to promote a cause or make headlines for a new project. No, this was supposed to be a reset. A quiet but deliberate move by Meghan to reshape her media narrative after years of both calculated outreach and massive backlash. By the time her team reached out to Emma Grede's producers, Meghan Markle was navigating choppy waters. Her public image, once shielded by the novelty of royal rebellion, had begun to fray. From controversial Netflix documentaries and inconsistent charity projects to the collapsed Spotify deal and a host of questions surrounding the authenticity of her public persona. Meghan had reached a point where even loyal fans began demanding clarity. In short, the Meghan brand needed new packaging, and Aspire offered just the kind of controlled vulnerability that could deliver it. The podcast Aspire wasn't just popular. It had become a touchstone in the digital media world. Created by Emma Grede, a self-made fashion and business magnate, the show positioned itself as a safe but rigorous platform for women, particularly women of color, to share their unfiltered stories about success, resilience, identity, and power. Its audience wasn't interested in tabloids or sensationalism. They wanted substance. They craved the kind of honesty that made you lean forward and think. Emma had cultivated this trust carefully. Past guests included trailblazers from across industries, tech founders, actors, athletes, scholars, and activists. They came on the show knowing that Emma wouldn't ambush them, but neither would she coddle them. She was known for her measured tone and unwavering poise, but she wasn't afraid to ask the uncomfortable questions. Her interviews were conversations, not interrogations, and that nuance had made Aspire one of the fastest-growing podcasts in the personal development and leadership space. For Meghan, this setup seemed perfect. What better way to deliver a version of herself that wasn't overproduced or overly scrutinized? A space where she could speak on motherhood, entrepreneurship, and womanhood without the threat of a brutal follow-up headline. Her team clearly viewed Aspire as a valuable opportunity. According to internal sources, the communication between her publicists and the podcast booking manager began weeks before the episode aired. But almost immediately, the tone of these exchanges raised eyebrows. Unlike most guests who submitted short bios, media links, and a few suggested discussion topics, Meghan's team came with an agenda. A detailed set of expectations was provided, including topics to avoid, a list of acceptable talking points, and a request for preliminary interview questions to be sent in advance. While it's not unusual for celebrity teams to vet content ahead of time, Emma's producers were struck by the rigid tone of these demands. It felt more like a negotiation with a network executive than a booking for a podcast, one source shared under condition of anonymity. There were phrases like non-negotiable topics and personal territory that we hadn't really seen from anyone else, not even guests with massive global profiles. Still, Emma's team was willing to cooperate to a point. After internal discussions, they agreed to respect Meghan's boundaries but firmly reiterated that editorial control would remain with the production team. They would not grant guest approval of the final cut. Meghan's representatives acknowledged this in writing. With that agreement in place, the interview date was locked. When the day finally arrived, the tension was palpable even before Meghan stepped into the building. Her arrival was scheduled with precision, down to the minute. Her security detail arrived early, checking the layout of the building and confirming privacy protocols. Then came her PR team. At least 2 representatives who coordinated closely with producers over the flow of the conversation. And finally, Meghan herself walked in, visibly poised but intensely guarded. Emma greeted her warmly, but with the professionalism of someone who'd hosted many high-profile figures before. Their early small talk was short but polite. Meghan commented on the design of the studio. Emma, always gracious, mentioned how thrilled her audience was for this episode. Still, there was a subtle stiffness that hung in the air. It was the kind of invisible weight that only becomes noticeable when one person in the room feels the need to maintain complete control. According to those present, the production team was surprised by the entourage Meghan brought with her. While most guests arrived with one assistant or friend at most, Meghan's group included a makeup artist, a PR consultant, and 2 members of her communications staff. The room that normally housed just the host, guest, and a producer now had extra eyes watching the process closely. Emma remained composed, but she made a decision early in the session to keep the conversation authentic. She asked open-ended questions. She followed where Meghan's answers led. And as the discussion unfolded, Emma gently nudged into areas that Meghan had, in pre-interview negotiations, subtly tried to steer away from, namely, public perception, criticism from within the Black community, and the challenges of maintaining personal integrity in the age of brand obsession. To her credit, Meghan answered most of the questions with eloquence. She spoke passionately about feeling misunderstood, about being a mother, about being a woman of color trying to navigate elite institutions built by privilege. Her answers were carefully measured, often punctuated with practiced emotion, but a few times her tone shifted. When asked how she deals with criticism from those who once supported her, she gave a response that felt defensive, even icy. "People are fickle," she said at one point. "They love you until you disappoint them, then they rewrite who you are." Emma, never one to shrink from an opening, followed up with a quiet but incisive question. Do you think some of those disappointments were real? Or just misinterpreted? That moment, according to one staffer who reviewed the raw footage, was when Meghan's composure visibly wavered. She blinked slowly. Her smile faltered. She responded, eventually, but not with ease. Still, the episode wrapped up with a gracious tone. Both women thanked each other. Meghan left the mic on a strong note. Emma thanked her team and went into another meeting while the producers began routine post-production. But underneath the surface, everyone sensed something unresolved. Something unsaid. It didn't take long before that something exploded. Later that afternoon, Meghan's team allegedly reached out with a follow-up, a request to preview the unedited audio. According to sources, the email was framed as a casual review, just for alignment. But it quickly escalated into a formal demand for final editing rights. Meghan reportedly wanted to remove or soften segments she believed would contribute to a negative interpretation of her character. The producers declined, citing company policy. That's when Meghan arrived back at the studio, accompanied by her team, to speak with Emma directly. This return visit, unplanned, unscheduled, is what triggered the now infamous confrontation. The remaining sections of the story delve into the details of that face-off. Emma Grede's firm rebuke, the staff reaction, the media leak, and the public's response. But before we go there, it's vital to understand that this wasn't just a clash between two women. It was a meeting of two completely different worldviews, Emma's belief in authentic storytelling versus Meghan's need to manage a fragile narrative. By the time Meghan left the studio for the second and final time, the damage had already been done, not to the audio file, but to the relationships inside that room. Trust had eroded. Tensions had peaked. And what was meant to be a moment of soft rebranding for the Duchess of Sussex had now become a defining incident, one that would follow both her and Emma Grede for months to come. From the outside, it seemed like everything had gone smoothly. The recording was done. The goodbyes were said. Meghan Markle had left the podcast studio after what most would assume was a routine high-profile interview. But what no one could have predicted was that the real story was just beginning, and it would unfold not on air, but off camera. Hours after the microphones were turned off and Emma Grede had moved on to her next scheduled meeting, Meghan's representative sent an unexpected email to the Aspire production office. Initially couched in polite language, the message suggested that Meghan and her team review the full episode for tone and context. To the untrained eye, the request may have seemed harmless. After all, celebrity guests often ask for a preview of their interview to ensure accuracy or confirm quotes. But insiders quickly noticed the tone of the message was more calculated than cooperative. The message didn't request a simple courtesy listen. It specifically referred to moments in the interview that might need to be adjusted or softened, citing concerns over public interpretation. Meghan, it seemed, was already envisioning the backlash certain responses could provoke, and she wasn't comfortable taking that risk. What sparked alarm for the Aspire team was the use of language that strongly implied control. The phrasing wasn't just about sensitivity, it was about image preservation. According to production sources who reviewed the request, there were phrases like, "We believe this section should be removed," and "This phrasing may damage long-term brand credibility." These weren't mere suggestions. They were directives. One of the most specific demands allegedly involved the segment where Emma had asked a reflective question about Meghan's critics. Do you think some of those disappointments were real? Or just misinterpreted? Meghan's answer, while composed, revealed a side of her that critics have long accused her of hiding, a sense of resentment, even superiority. Her tone reportedly sharpened, and her smile faded as she replied, "There's a tendency for people to turn on you the moment you no longer serve their fantasy." Meghan's team flagged this quote specifically in their request, arguing it might be twisted into an attack on the public or the press. They wanted it gone. Completely. Emma's producers, however, had no intention of surrendering editorial control. Aspire operated under a clear ethical policy. While they respected their guests' vulnerabilities and reputations, final editing decisions always rested with the host and production team. That stance wasn't just about authority, it was about integrity. To hand over the editing knife to a guest, even one as globally recognized as Meghan Markle, would mean surrendering the trust of their audience. Emma was notified of the request almost immediately. While she wasn't surprised that Meghan might have concerns over certain responses, she was taken aback by the language of the request. This wasn't a subtle tweak or post-show note. It was an attempt to recast the entire narrative of the conversation. It was, in Emma's view, an act of control masquerading as collaboration. She responded promptly but firmly. Aspire does not grant editorial approval to guests. She thanked Meghan for her time and emphasized that the team would handle the episode with the utmost professionalism and sensitivity. However, she made it clear, nothing in the original recording would be manipulated to favor a specific image. The response didn't sit well with Meghan's inner circle. According to multiple sources familiar with the situation, Meghan's communications director escalated the matter by initiating a phone call with Aspire's head producer. The tone, initially diplomatic, reportedly turned tense as the Markle representative insisted that removing the specified moments was in everyone's best interest. Phrases like future collaboration, brand alignment, and reputational clarity were used as veiled threats, hinting that refusal to comply could damage professional relationships moving forward. Emma, when briefed on this escalation, decided it was time to speak to Meghan directly. She requested a one-on-one phone call to address the matter plainly, woman to woman, without intermediaries. But instead of accepting the call, Meghan showed up in person. That decision shocked everyone in the office. No one was expecting her. The building's reception called Emma's assistant in a rush. Meghan Markle and 2 members of her team had arrived, asking to speak to Emma immediately. The production manager, caught off guard, quickly informed Emma, who had just wrapped up another meeting. Emma paused for a moment, processing the information. Then she asked her assistant to bring Meghan into her office. What unfolded next was not recorded, but according to 2 individuals with knowledge of the conversation, it was intense. Meghan allegedly entered the room composed but clearly frustrated. She reiterated her concerns about specific clips from the podcast and how they could be spun negatively by tabloids or YouTube channels hungry for controversy. She emphasized how she wanted the episode to reflect truth, not provocation. Emma, calm but unwavering, pushed back. She acknowledged Meghan's concerns but clarified that Aspire was committed to honesty, not just surface-level positivity. She reminded Meghan that the questions had been fair and the responses were her own. Editing out anything that didn't feel flattering would betray the show's values. That's when the conversation shifted from editorial disagreements to personal tone. Meghan allegedly accused Emma's team of being hostile and rigid, suggesting that they didn't offer the kind of flexibility a public figure like her needed. She made pointed remarks about the way she felt, unprotected, during the taping, suggesting that the host should have softened the tougher questions in the moment. Emma's response, according to sources, was a single firm sentence that brought the room to a cold silence. "You don't get to bully my staff because you're uncomfortable with your own words." The phrase hung in the air like thunder. Meghan's team fell silent. Meghan herself, reportedly caught off guard, took a moment before responding. Her tone shifted slightly. She downplayed her words, suggesting her frustration was not aimed at the staff but at the unpredictability of media spin. But the line had been drawn. Emma didn't raise her voice, but she didn't budge either. She made it clear that the interview would air as recorded, with professional edits, of course, but no manipulations to fit a post-interview narrative. Meghan stood, thanked Emma coldly, and left. The staff, unaware of the details but clearly sensing tension, watched as Meghan exited the building with her team in tow. One editor described the atmosphere that followed as radioactive. The studio's energy had gone from inspired to exhausted in minutes. And the ripple effects were just beginning. Over the next 24 hours, whispers of the confrontation began making their way through the podcasting and media community. Aspire staff received messages of support from other producers who had previously worked with celebrity guests under similar pressure. Many expressed relief that Emma had held the line, something not every host would dare to do. Meghan's camp, on the other hand, went silent. There were no official statements, but the story had already started leaking through back channels. An anonymous tip reached a media columnist within days, and the next thing anyone knew, online forums lit up with speculation. Did Meghan try to censor her podcast appearance? Why did Emma push back? Is the full interview even going to be released? The episode aired as scheduled, unedited, aside from the normal polishing of background noise and pacing. And while there was no official drama captured in the episode itself, keen listeners picked up on the tension in certain moments. Meghan's tone during the "people are fickle" comment. Emma's steady, firm follow-up. The slight hesitations in Meghan's response. To some, these were just minor details. But to others, they were signs of a much bigger story unraveling behind the scenes. What Meghan perhaps didn't anticipate was that by trying to shape her story so tightly, she had inadvertently given it away. The public sensed it. The authenticity felt strained. And instead of rebuilding her image, the interview, and everything surrounding it, became another chapter in the ongoing debate over who Meghan Markle really is when the cameras aren't rolling. In the end, the attempt to rewrite the narrative did not work. Instead, it backfired, highlighting a deeper conflict between two powerful women navigating the tension between authenticity and control. One walked away with her principles intact. The other walked away with more questions than answers. The recording studio had gone quiet. What should have been a wrap on a high-profile episode turned into something far more tense and unpredictable. Grede's production team had not yet resumed normal work routines. Everyone felt the weight of what had just happened. Meghan Markle had arrived unannounced, sat in Emma's office with a tone that suggested confrontation rather than collaboration, and exited with a chilled silence that echoed through the halls. But the story wasn't over. Only hours later, tension escalated into confrontation. The clash between Emma and Meghan was never meant to be public. Yet, due to thin studio walls, open doors, and the buzzing awareness of a curious staff, fragments of the heated exchange were picked up and quickly repeated. No audio recordings were released, but several staff members confirmed they heard raised voices and one line spoken loud enough to resonate like a thunderclap through the studio. "You can't bully my staff." That sentence wasn't shouted in rage. It was delivered in the kind of firm, grounded voice that stops a conversation cold. It was Emma Grede making a declaration not just to Meghan Markle, but to every assistant, technician, and creative who had been silently bearing the weight of increasing pressure from Meghan's camp. To understand how it escalated to this, we must return to the immediate moments after Meghan's in-person visit. As she left the building, Emma walked directly into the production office. She didn't hide her disappointment. She informed the team that Meghan had directly asked her to censor portions of the interview, specifically responses that came across as critical, defensive, or emotionally distant. She had refused, she told them. She reminded her team that their job wasn't to make anyone look perfect, but to portray authentic, meaningful conversations. The staff appreciated Emma's candor, but the tension wasn't done yet. That evening, Meghan's team made one final push. This time, the tone had shifted entirely. A second email was sent, not from the same representative, but from someone more senior, whose name was redacted in internal summaries shared with media sources. This email was firm, insistent, and outlined a final opportunity to amend the episode prior to airing to ensure reputational alignment. The subject line reportedly read, "Urgent review required, content sensitivity issues." Emma was infuriated. It was no longer about a guest being sensitive, it was about power. It was about a brand expecting others to surrender theirs. So the next morning, Emma held a closed-door meeting. No assistants, no PR reps, just the executive producer, legal counsel, and two senior editors. She shared the latest communication and asked one simple question: do we air it as is, or do we escalate? The team agreed unanimously. Air it. Let the truth speak for itself. Word of this decision must have reached Meghan's team quickly, because hours later Meghan returned to the studio. Not through formal scheduling channels, not by request, but by simply arriving. Again, without warning. Security was more prepared this time. Meghan was allowed entry, but this time she was escorted straight to the private conference room, not Emma's office. A production coordinator alerted Emma, who was deep in prep for a separate interview. Emma paused, looked at her assistant, and said, "All right, let's finish this." Inside the room, Meghan was seated with one advisor. No lawyers, just tension. Emma entered calmly, placed a notebook on the table, and sat across from Meghan. No handshake. No small talk. The air was thick. Meghan began first, her voice reportedly smooth, but strained. She insisted the concerns were never about censorship, but about collaborative presentation. She said she wanted to ensure the podcast represented growth and reflection, rather than controversy and conflict. She suggested edits to 3 segments, one about her perceived entitlement, one referencing the royal family indirectly, and a final comment that hinted at her frustrations with American media. Emma listened. She took notes. Then she spoke. "I've listened to this interview 4 times, Emma said. And what I hear is a woman who's trying to be real, but only on her terms. That's not how this works." Meghan interrupted, gently, but defensively. "I'm not asking you to betray your brand. I'm just asking you to not make me a headline." Emma leaned forward. "Meghan, That's exactly what you are. A headline. No matter what you say, they'll spin it. We both know that. But what you say here, on this podcast, is one of the few places you control by not controlling. That's the trust. That's why people listen. The conversation grew more intense. Meghan's advisor remained silent. Meghan pressed again, saying she had never experienced a show this uncooperative. She claimed that Aspire was the only platform that had refused post-interview collaboration. Emma asked directly, "Are you suggesting that I compromise my staff's work to make you feel better about something you said?" And that was the moment, the pivot, the line that would later become the episode's legend. Meghan responded with a vague, dismissive tone. Your staff didn't seem to understand the importance of tone. Emma, according to staff who overheard and confirmed to reporters, responded immediately, her voice rising only slightly. You don't get to bully my staff. The silence that followed was reportedly painful. Meghan's facial expression froze. Her advisor glanced downward. The words hit with undeniable clarity, not just because of their accusation, but because of their finality. There was no more room for negotiation. Emma continued. She said her staff were professionals. They had worked late, fact-checked every quote, and polished every second of audio to make Meghan sound intelligent, articulate, and composed. She explained that none of them signed up to be scolded, second-guessed, or made to feel that their work only mattered if it served a celebrity's image. You may not like everything you said, but you said it. You said it clearly, and you meant it. That's what we're airing. At that point, the conversation was over. Emma stood up. She thanked Meghan for her time, wished her well, and left the room. Meghan did not respond immediately. Her advisor closed the folder on the table, nodded politely, and both women exited 5 minutes later. They walked past the editing bay, where a few staff members glanced up but avoided eye contact. There was no shouting, no breakdown, but the silence was deafening. After they left, Emma returned to her team and called an all-hands meeting. She reiterated what had happened and told her team exactly what she said. She didn't sanitize the words. She told them, I told her not to bully my staff. And the room erupted in quiet relief and respect. From that moment forward, Emma Grede wasn't just the host of Aspire. She became a symbol of standing up to power, not out of arrogance, but out of principle. The story broke within 48 hours. A podcast industry insider leaked the exchange to a popular media columnist. The headline read, Emma Grede stands firm against Meghan Markle's demands. Within hours, the internet was ablaze. Some defended Meghan, suggesting she had the right to protect her image. But far more praised Emma for drawing the line, for holding her ground when it would have been easier to cave. The hashtag you can't bully my staff trended on X for 2 straight days. It became a rallying cry not just for production teams, but for assistants, freelancers, editors, and publicists everywhere who had dealt with similar treatment behind the scenes. And quietly, over the next few weeks, stories began emerging. Former collaborators, hosts, even stylists shared stories, some vague, others explicit, about difficult experiences working under Meghan's strict media controls. None of them attacked her character directly, but the implication was loud and clear. Emma wasn't the first to face the pressure. She was just the first to say no. This confrontation changed the tone of the public's perception. Suddenly, Meghan's struggles with the media were seen less as the product of unfair targeting and more as the result of overmanaged narrative control. In contrast, Emma Grede's authenticity became even more valuable. She had faced one of the most talked about women in the world and didn't flinch. By standing up for her staff, she stood up for every professional who's ever been expected to stay quiet while someone more powerful dictated the rules. She reminded the world that integrity isn't about control, it's about courage. And sometimes, courage sounds like this: you can't bully my staff. When the doors finally closed behind Meghan Markle and her advisor, the production floor didn't erupt into chatter. It didn't buzz with gossip or excited whispers. What happened instead was more telling. Everyone went quiet. But that silence wasn't fear. It was validation. For days leading up to that moment, the Aspire podcast team had endured what several described as one of the most stressful tapings of their careers. It wasn't just the technical difficulties or the last-minute schedule changes. It wasn't even Meghan's insistence on what lighting made her appear too severe, or how microphones should be adjusted so her voice didn't sound flat. What weighed the most was the constant feeling that nothing they did was enough, not professional enough, not fast enough, not compliant enough. It began subtly. When Meghan first arrived on set for the podcast recording, she came with a team of 3, an assistant, a PR consultant, and a personal stylist. According to one staffer, Meghan barely acknowledged the production crew. She offered no greetings, asked no questions, and instead directed her words exclusively to Emma Grede and her own team. She didn't look at us, one lighting tech recalled. She looked past us. This detail might seem minor until it becomes a pattern. Multiple crew members said that during setup, Meghan made frequent requests that required them to undo and redo hours of preparation. The temperature of the room had to be lowered twice. She insisted on a specific brand of bottled water that wasn't initially available. Her seat height was adjusted 5 separate times before recording began because she felt the angle gave her an appearance of authority, not empathy. Despite the production team's patience and flexibility, there was an unspoken pressure building. Everyone could feel it, the constant second-guessing of their decisions, the whispered commentary exchanged between Meghan and her team, and the repeated requests to rehearse the unscripted conversation Emma was supposed to have with her. She wanted control, said the audio editor, not just of her answers, but of the questions, of the air around her. During the recording itself, most of the staff had to clear the room. Only one sound technician and a producer stayed on hand. What they witnessed, though recorded, was unsettling in real time. Meghan responded confidently at first, but visibly tensed whenever Emma pushed past safe talking points. There was one moment, the producer said, when Emma asked about Meghan's relationship with media narratives. Meghan paused, looked to her PR advisor behind the glass, and then gave a polished, almost rehearsed answer that didn't quite fit the tone of the question. It was like watching a movie where the actor changes script mid-scene. After the taping ended, Meghan didn't thank the crew. She quietly exited the studio, leaving behind a room of stunned silence. It wasn't until Emma returned hours later that the staff began processing what had just occurred. In the days following the taping, things escalated quickly. Meghan's team sent several communications requesting access to the raw audio files, not for review, but for alignment and tone assessment, which essentially meant editorial control. These emails were curt, sometimes accusatory, and came with time-sensitive demands. They treated us like interns, one assistant said, like we were just there to serve a narrative. By the time the second email arrived, allegedly containing a veiled threat about reputation damage, the staff had already begun talking amongst themselves. Not to complain, but to brace for fallout. I knew we'd get blamed if anything went wrong, said a senior technician. That's always how it works. When someone powerful doesn't like the final product, they blame the team behind the scenes. And then came the unannounced visit, Meghan's return to the studio. While Emma was inside the meeting room confronting Meghan, the rest of the staff remained alert. Some pretended to continue working, but everyone was listening. They heard footsteps. They heard low voices. They heard tension. And then they heard it. Through the open hallway, Emma's voice, firm and clear, "You can't bully my staff." It felt like the moment someone stands up for you at school, said one intern. Like, finally, someone sees what we've been dealing with. After Meghan left, the mood in the office transformed. For the first time since the recording began, staff smiled, laughed, spoke freely. They shared their stories. They recounted how her team questioned nearly every decision, from camera angles to hallway decor, and how Meghan's assistant at one point suggested replacing one of the studio's framed quotes because it projected arrogance. They were controlling the room like it was Buckingham Palace, said the content coordinator. And we're just a podcast team in LA. The most powerful part of the aftermath wasn't the leaked story, it was the way the Aspire team found solidarity. Emma gathered everyone the next morning. She explained everything that happened behind closed doors, repeated her promise to protect their integrity, and opened the floor for anyone who wanted to speak. That's when staff, many of them junior, finally shared how pressured they felt. One editor even confessed he had considered quitting after being berated by a representative from Meghan's team for choosing harsh lighting during the early test shoot. Emma listened. She thanked each person. And she ended the meeting with one sentence. "You make the show. You will never be invisible here." That single act of leadership turned an unpleasant episode into something far more meaningful. The story eventually leaked, as stories often do, but the staff remained tight-lipped publicly. None of them spoke on record. They didn't need to. The public picked up on the nuances, the leaks, the timing, and drew their own conclusions. Meghan's silence in response to the viral hashtag "You can't bully my staff" only amplified the credibility of the story. Behind closed doors, however, Emma made sure each team member received a letter of acknowledgement, not just for surviving the pressure, but for thriving under it. For those who work in production, these behind-the-scenes dynamics are all too familiar. Big names, big expectations, and the unspoken rule, the client is always right. But Emma Grede broke that rule, and in doing so, reminded her team and the entire industry that professionalism flows both ways. Respect isn't just for the talent. It's for the crew, too. And when a leader defends the integrity of their team, it doesn't just protect the work, it protects the future. In the hours after Meghan Markle's sudden and tense exit from the Aspire podcast studio, her team didn't waste any time. Before the sun had even set on Los Angeles, calls were being made, emails were being sent, and a damage control strategy was already underway. To outsiders, it might have looked like silence, but behind the scenes, it was anything but quiet. According to two sources familiar with the communications, Meghan's public relations advisors immediately held a closed-door emergency call to assess the situation. The goal? To determine how much of the story might leak, what parts of the confrontation could become public, and how best to prepare a narrative that would shield her from reputational fallout. This wasn't the first time Meghan had faced PR trouble, but this one felt different. This was no palace aide or anonymous royal source. This was Emma Grede, a powerful woman with her own media empire, fiercely protective of her team and unafraid to speak out. The first signs of Meghan's PR machine in motion came in the form of polite but firm outreach to Emma's executive producer. The emails didn't acknowledge the confrontation, but focused instead on finalizing messaging alignment and harmonizing public-facing communication, phrases typical of soft-edged corporate lingo meant to avoid admitting anything directly. What was clear, though, was that Meghan's team wanted to shape the post-interview story, preferably without Emma or her staff speaking at all. According to one insider, the intent was to make it appear as though Meghan's episode on Aspire had gone off without a hitch, no disagreement, no tension, no fiery argument behind a closed door. But what they failed to realize was that silence from Emma didn't mean compliance. It meant calculation. Emma wasn't interested in public spats, but she wasn't going to let anyone rewrite what had actually happened either. Meghan's team then made a more aggressive move. An email sent to Emma's production office, reviewed by someone close to the team, included an assertive request for editorial control. They asked to preview the final cut of the episode in full, to give feedback on tone, timing, and even phrasing. This, despite having previously agreed, on paper, that Aspire retains full editorial independence. This was not a casual request. It was an effort to change the narrative before the public could hear it for themselves. But Emma's response was simple, a short, formal note thanking them for their interest and reiterating the show's policy. No guest receives final edit privileges. Period. The rejection set off a chain reaction. Meghan's team escalated, claiming that certain answers had been taken out of context and others were emotionally misinterpreted. Even though the episode had not yet been released, they suggested that the podcast format didn't accommodate the nuance necessary for a figure like Meghan, who has faced public attacks, scrutiny, and unfair press coverage. In a longer memo sent just one day later, a senior PR advisor even hinted that releasing the unedited episode could be damaging not just to Meghan, but to the broader mission of women supporting women. That line, in particular, struck a nerve with Emma's team. They tried to weaponize feminism, said one Aspire staff member privately. They were basically saying, if you publish this, you're betraying other women. That's not solidarity. That's manipulation. But Meghan's advisors weren't done. Another memo circulated the next day, this time attempting to shift the entire story. It suggested that Meghan had been triggered by an insensitive moment during the taping, never clearly stated, and had left the building feeling deeply unsettled by the production tone. It was a smart tactic, vague enough to avoid liability, yet suggestive enough to hint that Emma's team may have been at fault. However, several problems arose with this approach. First, there was no record of any production error, mistreatment, or misstatement during the interview. Second, staff testimony painted a very different picture, one where Meghan was the one issuing sharp orders, dismissing crew members, and micromanaging everything from background music to the style of Emma's introduction. As media outlets began sniffing around the story, some catching wind of the conflict, others waiting for one side to blink, Meghan's team went into full containment mode. They quietly reached out to a handful of celebrity-friendly journalists and podcasters, offering them pre-written quotes about the interview, describing it as a thoughtful and empowering dialogue about motherhood and leadership. It was spin. It was professional. And it was exactly what her team had done before, many times. But this time, something had changed. Grede didn't respond directly. She didn't hold a press conference. But neither did she allow herself to be pressured into altering the episode or silencing her staff. Instead, Emma allowed the story to unfold, organically, publicly, and honestly. When small leaks about the confrontation began to appear on social media, Meghan's team pushed back with controlled statements. They labeled them unverified rumors, fictionalized drama, and gross misrepresentations. But each denial lacked bite. The public, it seemed, had heard too many similar stories before. This wasn't the first time Meghan had been accused of difficult backstage behavior. Her time at Buckingham Palace was marred by reports of staff resignations and accusations of bullying, claims she has denied. Her Spotify deal ended quietly after just one season of her podcast, Archetypes, with behind-the-scenes reports of delays, creative differences, and high production costs. All of these precedents now hovered over the current controversy. And her team, for all their strategic maneuvering, couldn't completely erase them from the public memory. Emma's quiet resolve only made things harder. Her refusal to be bullied, and the loyalty of her staff, gave the story credibility without her saying much at all. After a week of behind-the-scenes chaos, Meghan's team tried one last card, proposing a joint statement that both parties could release to reaffirm mutual respect and alignment. The draft avoided specifics and used neutral language. But Emma declined. She saw the offer not as reconciliation, but as silence dressed in PR language. "We're not going to lie to clean up someone else's mess," one insider quoted her as saying. And with that, Meghan's camp had no more cards to play. They stopped pushing. They released no more memos. They gave no further commentary. What began as a coordinated PR strategy ended in quiet retreat. Still, the damage was done. The public watched closely, picking apart every word in silence. Comment sections flooded with opinion. Some still stood by Meghan, defending her as a woman under siege by an unfair media system. But others began questioning. Why were there so many misunderstandings everywhere she went? In the end, Meghan's team succeeded in doing one thing. They reminded everyone just how fragile public perception can be when confronted with unfiltered truth. Their overreach made the confrontation more visible, not less. Their attempts at controlling the story only reinforced the perception that something, indeed, had gone very wrong. And Emma Grede? She didn't need a microphone to win that day. She had her team. She had her values. And she had something far more powerful than spin, the truth on her side. In the world of celebrity interviews and glamorous studio setups, it's easy to forget one fundamental truth. Respect is earned behind closed doors, not in front of cameras. And on that day when Meghan Markle tried to control more than just her narrative, Emma Grede didn't raise her voice, didn't storm out, and didn't call for backup. Instead, she stood firm in a way that shook the studio more powerfully than any public statement ever could. Emma Grede is no stranger to high-stakes media. As the co-founder of successful ventures like Good American and a prominent business partner of the Kardashian-Jenner empire, she has sat across from powerhouses, celebrities, CEOs, and public figures far more intimidating than Meghan. Yet in every instance, Emma has held her ground, not with arrogance, but with grace, clarity, and non-negotiable boundaries. When the confrontation with Meghan occurred, Emma knew the stakes. Meghan wasn't just a guest. She was a global figure, a woman with legions of supporters and equal numbers of critics. She represented both royalty and rebellion. And if Emma wasn't careful, this moment could be twisted into a soundbite that would follow her forever. But Emma's silence, post-show, wasn't weakness. It was strategic fury, a refusal to play the game by Meghan's rules. Emma had sensed tension early during the interview, not just in the surface-level smiles or the curated calm Meghan wore throughout the first few questions, but in the way Meghan deflected, redirected, and subtly tried to steer the conversation into safe waters. For most of the taping, Emma allowed it. After all, Aspire wasn't meant to ambush guests. It was designed to create a space for honesty, vulnerability, and deep insights. But when she asked a direct question about accountability, about how Meghan reconciled her global influence with the critique, it wasn't a question. It was a command. What followed was a quiet exchange off mic, where Meghan allegedly said, I'd prefer if that line of questioning didn't make the final cut. It just feeds the negativity. Emma didn't argue. She nodded. She returned to the script. But something had already cracked beneath the surface. After the recording, Emma did not hide her displeasure. She didn't make a dramatic exit, nor did she confront Meghan in front of staff. Instead, she asked her team to give her 5 minutes alone with the Duchess. It was during this time that the now infamous confrontation occurred, Emma drawing the line, not just for herself, but for everyone in her studio. "You can't bully my staff." It was 6 words, calmly said, but loaded with the weight of everything Emma believed in. And she didn't need to say more. She didn't insult Meghan. She didn't accuse her of entitlement or disrespect. She simply named the one boundary she refused to let anyone, no matter how powerful, cross. In the hours after Meghan left, Emma returned to the control room. She didn't go on a rant. She didn't complain. She sat quietly, watching the raw footage, analyzing every answer, every deflection, every moment of tension. Then she made a decision. The episode would run as is. No edits to soften tone. No content cut to serve someone's personal comfort. And definitely no apologies. To her staff, this wasn't just a bold move. It was an act of protection. For days, they had worked under pressure, often sacrificing breaks, redoing segments at Meghan's request, tolerating her team's scrutiny and controlling attitude. When Emma refused to bend, she wasn't just salvaging journalistic integrity, she was defending her people's worth. One technician shared how Emma personally walked over to his booth after the edit decision and said, "I trust your instincts. Let's do this the way we always do. The right way." That level of leadership doesn't come from ego. It comes from principle. Privately, Emma also turned down 3 media inquiries requesting exclusive comments. She didn't want her voice to become the center of the story. Instead, she told her PR team to focus on pushing the episode, not the drama. Let the audience hear the conversation. Let them draw their own conclusions. It was a powerful play. While Meghan's team scrambled to craft counter-narratives, Emma simply leaned on transparency. No need to explain when you've got receipts, and in this case, the raw audio was all the evidence anyone needed. Emma's philosophy is simple: integrity over image. And that's what rattled Meghan's camp the most. They couldn't shake Emma because she refused to engage on their terms. She didn't need the press. She didn't need damage control. She had one thing that trumped all PR spin: an unshakable reputation built on fairness, discipline, and truth. Those who knew Emma weren't surprised. One longtime colleague remarked, "She doesn't play palace games. She builds empires. And she protects her people like family." Within days, whispers of the confrontation turned into viral commentary. Clips from past Emma interviews were suddenly being shared online, highlighting her consistency, how she holds every guest to the same standard, how she never compromises the vision of her platform to appease egos. Even as Meghan's team issued subtle denials and veiled statements, Emma remained silent. Not to protect Meghan, but to preserve the purity of her mission. Aspire wasn't created to elevate status. It was created to elevate truth. In a private team huddle the week the episode aired, Emma reportedly told her producers, "The world doesn't need more rehearsed royalty. It needs real women telling real stories. That's what we're here to do." That statement wasn't just about one guest. It was about every woman watching who's been talked over, gaslighted, disrespected, or told to play nice. By the time the episode went live, public anticipation had reached a fever pitch. Listeners didn't hear a takedown. They didn't hear aggression. What they heard was an uncomfortable truth. Meghan tried to control the space, and Emma let her speak, but didn't let her rewrite it afterward. That kind of control, quiet, unapologetic, and principled, is what real power looks like. Emma Grede didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't have to threaten a lawsuit or fire back in interviews. She simply stood still while the storm passed and proved that dignity, once anchored, can never be bullied. The podcast had barely been live for 12 hours before the storm hit. Social media erupted. Clips from the Aspire episode featuring Meghan Markle were dissected by influencers, podcasters, armchair analysts, and longtime royal watchers. Hashtags sprang up like wildfire, hashtag Aspire Unedited, hashtag Emma vs. Meghan, and the most viral of all, hashtag You Can't Bully My Staff. But what made this fallout different from the usual media frenzy surrounding Meghan Markle was one key detail: the silence. The press didn't know what to do with it. There was no public statement from Emma Grede. No Instagram story to clarify her position. No passive-aggressive quote fed to a gossip site. Nothing. And that, perhaps more than any angry denial or scorched earth rebuttal, gave the story its legs. Because silence, when strategic, doesn't weaken the narrative, it strengthens it. It invites the public to fill in the blanks. And fill them they did. Comment sections across platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and Reddit were filled with user observations about Meghan's tone during the interview, her body language, her avoidance of certain questions. People noticed the tension, the pauses, and the polished non-answers that seemed more choreographed than conversational. "She's not having a conversation, she's performing," one popular YouTube reaction video stated. That clip alone amassed over 1.2 million views in 3 days. But what really turned the tides wasn't just the reaction of fans or royal critics. It was the eerie silence from Meghan's inner circle. Ordinarily, when the Duchess faces backlash, there's a predictable PR rhythm. An anonymous source might speak to a sympathetic outlet. A publicist would issue a vague statement about unfounded rumors or selective editing. A social media post would redirect attention toward a philanthropic cause or personal milestone. This time, nothing came. And in that nothingness, perception hardened. Journalists started digging deeper. While no official transcripts of the post-recording argument between Emma and Meghan were released, multiple entertainment reporters began quoting anonymous sources close to the production. These sources confirmed a confrontation had taken place, that Meghan had expressed disappointment over the episode's direction, and that editorial control was requested and denied. One Variety piece summarized it best. Emma Grede stood behind her staff. Meghan Markle stood on her brand. And only one of those positions withstood the weight of silence. The fallout reached unexpected corners. Industry professionals in Hollywood took quiet notice. Behind closed doors, showrunners and producers began asking whether Meghan would become a guest with clauses, someone whose requests and post-production demands risked derailing an entire editorial process. One prominent podcast executive anonymously told a media blog, "We've all been warned, indirectly. If Emma Grede, who is known for her professionalism and fairness, can get publicly challenged over editing control, the rest of us need to be twice as cautious." The story took a more dramatic turn when an unaired segment of a different podcast, filmed weeks prior but unreleased until now, showed another host subtly hinting at a challenging guest who brought royal drama energy into the studio. Fans quickly put the pieces together, linking the unnamed guest to Meghan. Suddenly, the media wasn't just reporting the current fallout, it was retroactively rewriting previous interactions. More quietly, celebrities began pulling back. The social media support Meghan had grown accustomed to, likes, shout-outs, reposts, slowed. Not a single A-list friend publicly commented on the Aspire episode. Even the usual defenders, actors, authors, and progressive influencers remained on the sidelines. In the world of celebrity politics, silence from friends is louder than any headline. And for many observers, this was the most telling sign of all. Your friends don't ghost you unless they've heard something you haven't, a celebrity publicist tweeted cryptically. Meanwhile, Emma Grede's stock rose dramatically. The episode became the most streamed Aspire release to date. Her team reported a 70% spike in newsletter signups, and social media engagement doubled in the 2 weeks following the drama. But it wasn't just about numbers. It was about message. Emma had positioned herself as someone who refused to bend to celebrity culture's worst habits. She became a symbol, not of resistance for resistance' sake, but of respectful refusal to compromise integrity. And this resonated, especially with audiences exhausted by curated perfection and manufactured sob stories. People didn't want royalty. They wanted honesty. As for Meghan, the longer she remained quiet, the more the silence morphed into avoidance. And avoidance, in the court of public opinion, almost always equates to guilt. In a rare moment of brutal honesty, a British commentator summed up the fallout with sharp clarity. If Meghan wanted control, she should have brought a script. But real interviews don't run on cue cards. And real women don't flinch when the mirror is held up to them. By the time tabloids began recycling headlines about Meghan's strained media relations, the narrative had already solidified. This wasn't just about a podcast episode anymore. It had become a case study in how power, ego, and public trust collide. Emma Grede had asked one simple thing: let the story speak for itself. Meghan Markle, by trying to control it, only proved why that story mattered in the first place. Behind every polished appearance and well-rehearsed interview lies a machine, one made of consultants, strategists, advisors, and tightly run communications teams. For Meghan Markle, that machine had always been both a fortress and a weapon. But in the days following the fallout from her explosive confrontation with Grede, something unprecedented happened. The machine cracked from within. The first signs were subtle: whispers, anonymous tips to journalists, and vague references in influencer circles. Then came the emails. An anonymous whistle